Welcome back to Ethos Trek. I'm Sera. Today I'm answering an email question about Article 5 conventions and why Texas billionaire Tim Dunn's involvement in this movement represents a clear and present danger to American democracy. Like most of my videos, this is going to be direct, fact-based, and I'll give you concrete actions you can take at the end. So let's get started. We should probably start with what is an Article 5 convention. Article 5 of the United States Constitution provides two paths for amending the Constitution. The first path, the one we've used 27 times, requires a 2/3 vote in both chambers of Congress, followed by ratification by 3/4 of the states. The second path has never been used in our 230-year history. It allows 2/3 of state legislatures, 34 states, to force Congress to call a constitutional convention to propose amendments. Those amendments would then need ratification by 38 states. Here's what's critical to understand. Article 5 provides absolutely zero guidance on how such a convention would work. There are no rules about who selects delegates, how they're chosen, whether they can be limited to specific topics, or what prevents them from proposing wholesale changes to our Constitution. So who is Tim Dunn and what's he got to do with anything? Tim Dunn is a Texas fracking billionaire worth approximately $1.5 to $2.2 billion. He's the CEO of Crown Quest Operating, which pumps 140,000 barrels of oil per day from the Permian Basin. He's been called the most effective political donor in Texas and was the largest individual source of campaign funds in Texas in 2022 and 2023. But here's what matters for this discussion. Dunn is a founding board member and director of Citizens for Self-Governance, the organization that runs the Convention of States project. This is the most well-funded and organized effort currently pushing for an Article 5 convention. Dunn contributed $5 million to Trump's Make America Great Again super PAC and is among the top 10 individual donors to the Trump campaign. He also funds the Heritage Foundation, America First Legal, run by Stephen Miller, and the Center for Renewing America, run by Russell Vogt. The Convention of States. The Convention of States claims 19 states have passed their resolution calling for a convention. They need 34 states total. This movement is backed by massive dark money funding from the Koch donor network, the Mercer family, at least $500,000, Tim Dunn, millions of dollars, and coordination through ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council. Their stated goal is to, quote, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, unquote. But the agenda is much more specific and dangerous. Why is this so dangerous? First, there are no constitutional guardrails. Legal scholars across the political spectrum, from the Cato Institute's Walter Olson to Stanford's Gerald Gunther to University of Maryland's Miguel Gonzalez Marcos, warn that there is no mechanism to limit what a convention could do. As Common Cause documented, Article 5, quote, says not a word, unquote, about whether Congress must aggregate different state applications on different topics, how delegates are selected, whether states get equal votes regardless of population, or what prevents delegates from exceeding their mandate. Supreme Court precedent in Coleman v. Miller establishes that these questions are likely non-justiciable, meaning that courts cannot intervene to stop a runaway convention. Second, there's historical precedent. our own Constitution was created by what historians agree was a runaway convention. Delegates met in Philadelphia in 1787 to amend the Articles of Confederation. Instead, they scrapped the entire document and wrote something completely new with a lower ratification threshold. Third, the real agenda. Here's what Dunn said at a 2019 Convention of States summit. Quote, "When we started the Convention of States, I knew we had to have a spiritual revival, a great awakening, and a political restoration for our country to come back to its roots," unquote. The Convention of States platform explicitly advocates removing, quote, "federal interference," unquote, from the oil and gas industry, enshrining fossil fuel protections in the Constitution, claims that any attempt to ban fossil fuels, quote, "is impossible to achieve and dangerous to attempt," unquote, implementing what critics call a Christian nationalist agenda. As Rolling Stone reported, Dunn believes the Bible, quote, "should profoundly affect politics," unquote, and that Christians are, quote, "made to rule and reign," unquote. Fourth, everything is at risk. Once a convention is called, constitutional scholars warn that all constitutional rights could be on the table. First Amendment protections, voting rights, equal protection under the law, reproductive rights, LGBTQ+ protections, separation of church and state, environmental regulations, Social Security and Medicare. As Rick Hasen, Chancellor's professor of law at UC Irvine, warned, there's a risk we'd end up with a runaway convention proposing amendments on abortion, gun rights, immigration, and issues far beyond the stated purpose. Fifth, unelected, unaccountable delegates. Article 5 does not specify how delegates are chosen. States could appoint political cronies, donors, ideologues, with zero democratic accountability. These unelected individuals would have the power to propose fundamental changes to our founding document. The critical thinking question today? Ask yourself, why are fossil fuel billionaires and Christian nationalist megadonors spending millions to rewrite the Constitution through a process with no rules, no limits, and no accountability? Is this really about limiting federal power? Or about enshrining permanent minority rule and protecting corporate interests in our founding document? What can you do? Contact your state legislators. Find out if your state has passed an Article 5 convention resolution. 11 states have rescinded their calls. Delaware, Nevada, Maryland, New Mexico, Colorado, New Jersey, Illinois, Oregon, New York, Connecticut, and Washington. Demand your state reject new applications or rescind existing ones. 2. Support organizations fighting this. Common Cause is leading the resistance. CommonCause.org. They provide specific information and advocacy tools. 3. Educate your network. Share accurate information about Article 5 conventions. Counter the narrative that this is about, quote, limiting government, unquote. Explain what's actually at stake. 4. Follow the money. Track Convention of States funding and lobbying in your state. Expose dark money networks funding this effort. Connect the dots between fossil fuel interests and constitutional change. 5. Demand congressional action. Congress has never established procedures for an Article 5 convention. Pressure your representatives to either establish strict procedural safeguards or refuse to call a convention without such safeguards. Here's the bottom line. While we're occupied with the minute-by-minute multitude of distractions, Tim Dunn and his allies are spending millions to exploit a never-used constitutional provision that has no rules, no limits, and no safeguards. They are 15 states away from triggering a convention that could fundamentally rewrite American democracy. This isn't about balanced budgets or limiting federal overreach. This is about enshrining Christian nationalist ideology and fossil fuel protections in the Constitution itself, making them virtually impossible to change. We cannot allow unelected billionaires to rewrite our founding document in a process designed to evade democratic accountability. This is also one of many reasons why local, state-level politics and so-called down-ballot elections are so important. This is Ethos Trek. Stay informed, stay engaged, stay active. I'm Sera, and I'll be back in a few days.